Hello and welcome to Let the People Speak. I'm Ana Sisnett with the Foundation for a Compassionate Society. We're here today with Gisele Mills from the Third World Women's Project at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., and with Joselina da Silva, a visitor from Brazil who's with the Institute, and she's been traveling throughout the U.S. since January. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Gisele, could you tell us a little bit about the Institute for Policy Studies?
Sure. The Institute is about 26 years old now. It's based in Washington, D.C., and it's basically a place where we try to link research around U.S. policy and political issues to activism in the United States. I've been working with the Third World Women's Project, which is a particular project in global education based on bringing women from developing countries to talk about the social conditions they face in their countries, and in particular, how U.S. policy affects them as women.
That's interesting, and I take it that's the reason why Joselina is here. How did you meet her and come
I spent a year in Brazil before coming to the Institute, and I worked with the Black Women's Conference, and Joselina was one of the organizers on the organizing committee. And coming here and starting the project this year, I decided to invite Joselina to participate as a resident associate.
Yeah, and it's been a very rich experience, especially because through all the places I've been visiting, I've had a chance, besides talking at universities to an academic audience, I've also having chance to get in touch with community organizations and sharing experiences. So in such the way that I'm learning a lot, and I will be able to share all this experience with my sisters in Brazil, because I will be traveling around the country when I go back, which is going to be in the end of next September.
What is something that you have been struck with in traveling around the U.S. that you think will be of particular interest to your sisters in Brazil?
Well, one of the things is the fact that we have very short information in the media in Brazil about what's going on with the black population here in the United States. Generally, what we see there is Ebony magazine for those who can read English, which are not a very great majority of the population, and also the Bill Cosby show. So once more, there is that whole myth that after the 60s, all the blacks in the States are at least middle class, and all of them have had a chance to go to the universities. So when I arrived here and got to New York, for instance, and saw so many beggars in the street and see that great majority of them are black, I felt as if I were in Brazil, walking through any streets of big cities in the country.
Is there anything that you would like to say to the audience about Brazil that you think is important for us to know?
Well, I think one of the things is to tell everybody to be careful not to be trapped in that myth of racial democracy that we always hear about Brazil. Yes, we have racism in Brazil, and we don't have a subtle racism as sometimes we read about. The black population is unfortunately in the bottom of the society, with no rights for health, for school, and not even for rights to study the history of our people in the country, in the diaspora, and in Africa. And this is one of the reasons why the great majority of the blacks in Brazil deny their African ancestry, because they never hear good things about our history, our heroes, and our history.
I would just add also that having Joselina go on tour, one of the things that I feel that has strengthened for me is the idea of the unity of the struggle of black people. And I think that while it's important for Joselina to go back and talk about the reality of the black experience, the contemporary black experience in the United States, it's also been incredibly important for black people here to realize that there are struggles of black people against racism, not only in the United States, not only in South Africa, but throughout Latin America, in the Caribbean, in Europe even. And I think that has been an incredible gain that we as American people have had in listening to Joselina's talks.
That's wonderful. Are there any plans for bringing other Brazilian women or for women from here to go to Brazil?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that because part of what the new directions of the Third World Women's Project is to look at the conditions that Third World women in the United States are facing and the commonality of our struggle as women of color in the United States. I think that in a similar way that our slogan being "Let the Other Half Speak" has been focused on bringing women from third world countries here, that I think it's important to begin to have it be a two-way, what we call a South-South exchange, where we have women of color from the United States traveling to other countries to talk about their experiences here. So hopefully that will be happening in the very near future. One upcoming project that we're working on is to bring to take a delegation of women, particularly from Latino communities in the United States, to the next Feminist Encuentro that's going to be held in Argentina in November. And hopefully several of us will be going from Argentina to Brazil to maintain those connections that we have developed.
And November, as I understand it, is a particularly important month in
November
history.
is something really, we can say that it's our Black History Month, because it was in November in the 17th century that the hero Zumbi dos Palmares was killed. And we understand that Zumbi is our leader because he was the responsible for organizing the first free republic in the Americas, which is Quilombo dos Palmares. So the November the 20th was the day when Zumbi was killed. Then we took this date to use as a struggle and also as an opposition to May 13th, because in 1888 was when the emancipation of the slaves happened in 1888. And we put November as an opposition to May to show that in fact we are still slaves, and the abolition didn't really happen. So that's why November is such an important month for us.
What can we expect, those of us who will be lucky enough to travel to Brazil? Do you have any suggestions for us when we go down there that, things we might be aware of ahead of time and that we should be sensitive to?
Mm-hmm. Well, this November started because of a great struggle of the Black movement to have this month recognized as a month for more reflections and discussions about race in Brazil. But unfortunately, the great systems, especially the media, I kind of took power of this. So the first thing to be done when we go to Brazil in this period is to choose and to be aware what are the real activities organized by the Black movement, because some official things happen and are just celebrations and just dances, and once more the folklorization of our culture. So people who go down to Brazil must be aware of what kind of things are they taking part. So first thing to see is who is organizing the activities that you choose to take part.
Do you have any suggestions for some of the activities we might be on the lookout for?
Well, one of them is the Kizomba International Festival, which is organized in Rio de Janeiro. And there are many.
I was just going to say International Festival of Black Arts.
Yeah, the International Festival of Black Arts. This festival is important. For instance, it first happened in 1984, and it was the very first time that we had a South African delegation from ANC taking part in the festival. So it was the cultural group Amandla, which is, as I said, from ANC, which sent to Brazil a delegation of 35 artists, activists, to talk about what was going on in South Africa. And this festival is going to happen again this year. And many other activities which happen all over the country. So the first way, the best way, is first pick up names of groups from the Black movement, get in touch with them and ask for suggestions, because we have about 415 different groups of the Black movement all over the country, and they are the ones who know best what is the place to go.
Could you inform us a little more about the role of women in the Black movement?
Well, women have been struggling for the liberation of Black people in Brazil very much earlier, or a long time before, than the feminist movement, right? Because it was right after the slavery, through the houses of candomblés, all of them organized by women, that we could learn the culture, the religion, and also we learned how to resist the oppression. And the women who are today in the leadership of the Black movement, they are all in some form related to those women from the beginning of the century.
So similar to the role of women in the Black church in the United States, I would believe, that looking at the church as not only as a religious, a place of religion, but really a place for the renewing of strength, and as a symbol of the resistance of Black people. And I was always very struck by the similarities and the role of the congregation concept, that we as Black people have always used this place of congregation as a place of resistance and renewal and strength.
Is there a role for children in the movement?
Yeah, one of the things that is more striking in the women's organization, and which allowed the Black movement in general to change, is the fact that now all our conferences have place for children, but not to be just running around, but in fact all the conferences now are happening, in fact 2 conferences at the same time. So while the adults are discussing, there are some other activists taking care of the children. And when it is a women's conference, are the men who are taking care of the children, but in fact having workshops on theaters, on arts, and all of those workshops talking about our culture as Black people in the country. So the kids leave the conference with an amount of information that most of the time they don't have at school.
After conferences, a lot of times, I know that we go home and we're one person going back to our community. Are there ways of bringing information back from conferences as you do them, so that it's more of a collective participation and sharing once you get back home?
Well, what I understand, the way to have a person who goes to a conference involved with the responsibility of bringing back an information is by choosing people, is by voting who is going to the conference. Because at the time there is a group choosing, of course, this group will be the first to ask that person information about what was going on. So the person doesn't go to the conference by herself, but she goes as representing not only one institution, but a group of people who chose the person to go there. So even if it happens that the person doesn't want to bring something back, she has to, because there will be people asking her some more information. And that's the way we've been doing. For the first National Black Women's Conference, for instance, all the women who took part in the conference were delegates. They were chosen in their states to be there. So they had responsibility to bring the information back.
You, in fact, are representing an organization in Brazil, am I right?
Yeah, I am from the Center for Networking of Marginalized Population, which is a black organization from Rio de Janeiro, and which has 5 projects, and I am from one of those projects, the Women Project.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the 5 projects are, one is a newspaper called The Spoken Majority. The other is deals with the slums, with the favelas, the poor areas. The other one is deals with the abandoned children, with the street children. The other is a center of documentation. We have been for the last 15 years collecting all the information in the media. The main newspaper which deals about black people and collecting them in such a way that it's a resource for anyone who want to know how the media portrays us or what's really going on with the black community can go to the center and make its research. And the other is the Women's Project, where I take part. At the Women Project, we work at community level, and we also work inside the black movement.
And this organization, is it, it represents a certain class of people or classes of people, or?
Well, we understand that the question of race is above the question of class. So anyone who wants to struggle for rights of black people, no matter what class that person is, can be part of the group. But because we understand that we have been oppressed for being blacks and for being poor. And in case of us women, we have been oppressed for being black, women, and poor. So it's not a question of being poor that you're going to struggle for poor only, but it's a question of being a person with an ideology which understands that we need to struggle for better condition of lives for everybody and against an imperialist system.
Earlier, you mentioned work in solidarity with South Africa. Are there other groups of people that you work in solidarity with?
Yeah, we have been working in solidarity with the Indian population in Brazil, because unfortunately today we have just 220 Indians, 220,000 Indians in Brazil, which is nothing if we understand that that was the time that they used to be the great majority of the population. So they were definitely exterminated. And as the name of our institution is the Center for Marginalized Population, the Indians are the most marginalized peoples in our countries. So we have been working together and struggling for better conditions of lives.
As 1992 approaches, are there any activities planned or projects taking place in solidarity with the native Brazilians?
Yes, there are. When I left Brazil, there was some people from my group preparing to travel to South African country, South American countries, to get together and struggle more and organize activities around this subject. And also, there is a film which was made in Brazil who talks about the 500 years, but seeing it through the perspective of the death cries, and what really the death cries is, and what's the relation of it with the 1982.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, this film wasn't organized by my group. It was organized by Serpa. You know how to center? Well, Serpa, which is a religious, progressive religious group, and it deals pretty well, and it was made to be used by communities. So to work with community people to understand what really the death is and how it's been affected especially the Latin American countries, and that it's not just a question of raising salaries or not. Most of the time it's told us, and all those myths about overpopulation and many other myths that we hear, that most of the times we poor people think that it's our fault that we are poor.
Internalized oppression.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We recognize that. Would you like to add anything to what Joselina has said, or?
I think just again, to reiterate the point of how important it is to get the first-hand information from women from other countries, and the significance of actually making those kind of connections and developing a global perspective, because as you said, these kinds of myths and internalized oppression are things that all oppressed peoples feel, and that how to be aware of what is happening in other countries helps to strengthen everyone's movement. To be in solidarity together, I think, helps us to understand that we are not alone, and that none of us are free until all of us are free.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I would like to thank our guests, Gisele Mills from the Institute for Policy Studies and Joselina da Silva, and wish you continued success in your travels and upon your return home. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.